Hey everyone, welcome back to another evidence reveal video. This will be our final evidence reveal video from our Ghosts of America road trip that we took back in July. We have finally made it to the coup de grace of our evidence reveals. This is an evidence reveal video for the Waverly Hills Sanatorium, located in Louisville, Kentucky. This was a trip that we had planned out late last year, sometime in December, and culminated into a massive road trip that Haunted Peach and I went on throughout the United States, going to different haunted locations and ending up at the Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Speaking of Haunted Peach, she is finally joining us here on an evidence reveal. Say hello.
Hi everyone.
We're going to review the stuff that we captured at Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Before we get into the evidence reveal, I just wanted to touch bases and remind everyone that if you want to listen to the personal paranormal experiences that we had between Haunted Peach and I, as well as some of our group that actually partook in the investigation, you can listen to our last podcast. That was episode 16. We had a majority of the group get together a month after the Waverly Hills Sanatorium investigation, and we basically recounted all of the personal experiences that we had during that evening. Let's jump right into the experiences that we had that we actually captured evidence for. We're going to start off with the visual evidence. First, we're going to start off with a questionable photo that was taken. Now we're not labeling this as something paranormal, but during the walkthrough of the property of Waverly Hills, we had the opportunity to walk the perimeter. And while we were walking the perimeter, I was taking various photographs of the actual building from the outside. So I wasn't really per se paying attention to any possible paranormal things that might be happening. But upon reviewing some of the photographs that we had taken from the perimeter, there are a couple of questionable pictures that came through that we wanted to present to you guys. Now, we are not labeling these as true paranormal pictures because it's very difficult to tell in the photos whether something is actually paranormal. We have no way of debunking it, but it's definitely something questionable, and we wanted to share them with you. So at some point, we reached the back of the building, and we were doing the perimeter walkthrough, and everyone took turns getting their pictures taken in front of the back entrance of the building. There were a couple of questionable things that showed up in one specific window when I was doing review of these photographs. And I'm going to go ahead and bring up the photographs now. Haunted Peach, when you look at these pictures, right off the bat, do you notice anything out of place?
No, nothing is out of place with these particular ones.
Yeah, it's very subtle. You really have to be looking hard into the actual picture itself to see what we are referring to. So at first glance, it just looks like a normal image of the back of the building and Haunted Peach and I standing in front of there. But as I was analyzing these pictures, I saw something weird in one of the windows. So let's go ahead and zoom in on the window in question. Now there are two pictures in particular that we're highlighting here. They were both taken in succession, and a mere few seconds one after the other. What you see here in the darkness of this window, well, Haunted Peach, what does it look like to you? So in the first picture, Haunted Peach, what do you see in the window?
In the first picture that I see in the window, it looks like someone looking down.
Yeah, you see kind of a very faint silhouette of what appears to be a male figure, or at least what we believe might be a male figure, looking down at the group. Let's move on to the second picture, and this is the same window, And now what do you see?
It looks like someone sitting there with their head down on their arm, looking sideways out.
Yeah, it looks like someone is sort of like resting their elbow on the windowsill, and their head is resting against like their hand or their forearm, and they have their head tilted. Again, we're not calling these particular pictures paranormal. We're just presenting them because they were something questionable that appeared. It's very possible that what we're looking at is matrixing, and maybe as a result of that matrixing we are making out a figure that realistically might not be there. In either case, we wanted to present these to you, and you can formulate your own opinion on what you see in the photographs. So if you have any comments regarding these particular pictures, just let us know. So let's move on to the next visual piece of evidence that we have. Now this one is not as subtle, and it's actually kind of creepy when you think about the location in which we captured it. So if you recall back to our podcast, our group podcast, we had been talking about how we had set up a base camp or headquarters of sorts in the chapel, which is located on the second floor. So after we had done the perimeter walkthrough outside of the building, we did a daylight walkthrough through the inside of the building. And there was an interesting experience that we had once we left the chapel room, and our guide had taken us to a room where there is a memorial for a nurse that worked at the sanatorium, and she is purported to be the famous lady in white that has been photographed on the second floor. So at that point, once we exited that room, we were encouraged to take multiple photographs, as many as we could, during the walkthrough, because there was a strong possibility that something could show up when we're not really paying attention. So we had a very interesting experience where Haunted Peach and I saw a shadow figure or a silhouette of a woman peeking out one of the doors. So we were taking pictures during this time, and I'm going to pull up the pictures here, and we're going to discuss them here really quickly. So I'm going to show you, here is picture number 1. Okay, here is picture number 2. And here is picture number 3. So these were taken mere seconds, one after the other. You'll notice that they were not taken with any type of flash. The camera does have an autofocus feature on it, so there is a slight delay when taking photographs. At this point in time, there was still daylight enough that we could take pictures without flash and be able to partially illuminate certain parts of the building without having the flash on. But you'll notice from the pictures, from the first to the last one, that there are a couple of things that are there and then not there, especially within the first 2 images and then the last one. Now what you are seeing in these photographs, or what is in the actual photographs, is this long hallway that is just past the room where this memorial is for the nurse. And just past that is the actual chapel, which was our headquarters. So what you're paying attention to is mainly the windowsills of the chapel. So I'm going to go through the pictures here so that you can see exactly what we're referring to. So pay attention to the windowsills on the left hand side of the images. Here's picture number 1 again. Here's number 2. And here is number 3. Let's do that one more time. Picture 1, picture 2, and picture 3. Okay, alright, we're going to put up all 3 images side by side so that you can see the point of reference of all 3 pictures and see what we're referring to. Now, Haunted Peach, when you look at these images, what is it that you notice between the first two and the last picture?
In the first two pictures, I see two figures in both of them. Just different positioning for one figure. And the last one, I don't see them there any longer.
Yeah, there definitely appears to be two figures right at the end of the hallway, and they appear to be in front of the windowsills of the chapel. So when you saw these images the first time, when I showed them to you, what ran through your mind?
What ran through my mind was these two figures just where they were. I think we spent quite a bit of time trying to debunk it.
Yeah. Well, I think the oddest part of this is that there was no one at the chapel at this point of the investigation. In fact, this was during the walkthrough. So we weren't really looking for something paranormal to happen, but we have these questionable pictures that came up during the walkthrough. And these two figures show up in the first two pictures. Now, what I'm going to put up here is a cutout of the image information that we have for these particular files, and you'll see the timestamps at which these photographs were taken. So here's the side-by-side of all three images, 1, 2, and 3, and you can see here that between the first and second image there was a 4-second span, and between the second and third image there was a 2-second span. So these figures that appear at the end of the hallway, they essentially appear within a total span of 6 seconds. And for at least a good 4 seconds they were there and then gone within 2 seconds. What I find very weird is that the way that these are positioned, as Haunted Peach alluded to, it almost looks like these are like the heads of the top of the heads of figures, and they appear to be walking away, like walking from right to left away from the chapel. And what you'll notice is, just to give you a point of reference, I'm going to show you a video of the chapel. And just so you can get a point of reference, I'm holding the camera now. I'm 5'9", holding this camera at about shoulder height. And you can see here that the windowsills, at least the base of the windowsills, are about my shoulder height. Which means that, let's go back to the images here, you'll see that the figures do appear to be the top of someone's head, down to their possible shoulders. But there was something creepier about them, and it actually makes perfect sense when you really think about it. Haunted Peach, what did you notice about these figures and the way that their heads are shaped?
They look like the hoods of nuns.
Yeah, and you know, when you think about it, it makes perfect sense, because what we're looking at is the chapel at the end of the hallway. So that there would potentially be two nuns leaving the chapel gives a little more credence to the fact that we believe that these images that we captured are of two nuns. Another thing you'll notice is at the base of the pictures, you see what might appear to be the edge of like the dresses that they would have worn, that nuns wear. But there was something else that we actually saw in the images when we were reviewing them just now during our review. Haunted Peach, what do you notice between the first and second picture of the figure that's in the middle, the one that's in the middle windowsill? What does it look like it's doing?
It looks like it's looking back.
Yeah, essentially it looks like it's looking toward me, or toward us. So you'll see, here's the first image, and it looks like both figures, you'll see the shape of both of them is the same, like they're walking with their heads facing forward, and they're going away from the chapel. So now let's look at the second picture, and you see the second figure, the one that's behind, it has a different position of the head, almost like it's turned its head toward us and is looking directly at us. Now, these pictures obviously are not in full high definition. At least I did not see these figures when I was taking the pictures. Haunted Peach, do you recall seeing these figures at all?
No, I don't recall even seeing them at all.
No, and even more so, everyone else in the group was actually behind us, and there was no other source of light other than the light source from daylight outside. So there's no way that this could be like a shadow being cast from either one of us. And also the windowsills of the chapel actually have no glass in them. So it's not a reflection either. Now, when we were referring to the silhouette that we saw, I'll highlight the specific area, but we saw the silhouette of a woman in the third doorway, and as you can see, this is where the third doorway is. But these two figures seemingly appear out of nowhere and only appeared in the photographs. So we checked with our group. We made sure that we went through every possibility as far as debunking these. Now, there were some pictures taken with flash, and these particular pictures were taken without a camera flash. So the reason I show you the three pictures all together is so that you can see that there was definitely a process. We took 3 pictures in total, and 2 out of the 3 had these strange figures in them. Now, we're not 100% ready to call this paranormal, because the one thing that we cannot debunk is the possibility that this was possibly the camera out of focus, and maybe that's what's creating the figures. But we definitely find it highly questionable and unexplained that these 2 figures would show up in 2 of the photos and not the third. So we're leaving it open to interpretation. We're not labeling it as paranormal, but it is some kind of visual evidence that we wanted to share. So yeah, it's pretty crazy. Here we are very unsure of what these figures are, if they're an autofocus error of the camera, or if these are actually shadow figures of 2 nuns leaving the chapel. Obviously that would make sense because of the location, but again, this is open to interpretation. So let's move on to the last 2 pieces of visual evidence that we have. These 2 pieces of evidence were actually taken during our first group session in room 304 on the 3rd floor. So if you recall back to the podcast that we actually had a lot of activity that happened in room 304. So the first one that we're going to share with you is an interesting light anomaly that appears behind one of our investigators' backs. As you know, Haunted Peach and I are not big on light anomalies and orbs. We actually believe that a majority of them can be debunked. So, with that being said, this particular light anomaly appeared and occurred during a session where a member of our group by the name of Eli, who is a psychic medium, was attempting to cross over the spirit of a male, and during this session there was a light anomaly that appeared, and here is the video of that. As you can see, it appears very quickly behind his back. His eyes are closed. He did not see this. I was the one recording with the full spectrum camera and managed to capture it. So, Haunted Peach, just to give a little bit of backstory on this, could you describe the energy or the feeling that was going on during this session while we were in room 304, and he was trying to cross over the spirit.
The energy of the room itself had a few different feelings to it. For the first part of it, it was calm, really serene at one point, made you feel a bit comfortable. And another part, it was playful.
Yeah, so and we'll get into that here in a second with our second piece of visual evidence that we have. But yeah, and the thing is that I did see this anomaly when it happened, but I didn't see it physically with my own eyes. To be quite honest, I was looking through the LED screen of the full spectrum camera. I wasn't really focusing on the ambient surroundings of everyone. So, but I present this because it happened during a moment where something pivotal was happening during that session. So again, open to interpretation. We're definitely not calling this paranormal. It's just an interesting light anomaly. Could it have been a bug? Could it have been a speck of dust? That's very possible. So we're just presenting it here, and leave your comments down in the comment section and let us know what you think about that. Let's move on to our final piece of visual evidence. This one happened during the same session. This actually happened prior to the light anomaly that I just showed you. So Haunted Peach had alluded to a very playful energy that we were getting in the room. So a couple of our investigators, Stephanie and Dwayne, they had brought in a toy ball. It was a Nerf football. It's a kind that looks kind of like a missile. It has a tail end of like an arrow, and it's an actual Nerf football. So we brought that in, and we set it down on the ground, and the experiment was to try to get whatever spirit was there to interact with us by knocking it over. So this actually occurred on 3 separate occasions. I'm not going to show the full clip because it's way too long. I've condensed all 3 occurrences down into this short clip. So I'm going to play that for you now. Please excuse my enthusiasm. This is something that we were all already really hyped about the investigation, so my adrenaline level was really high at this point, and we were getting some kind of activity prior to these occurrences that definitely felt paranormal. So here are the 3 moments in which the ball was knocked over. Here it is.
40s, huh? I feel something touching my right leg.
Oh,
there you
It just fell over.
Go away. That's a Union song. That's from the north.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
And it fell a different way.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that.
That was a hard one. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you ever go to Gettysburg? Whoa! Whoa! Okay, so those were the clips of the Nerf ball being knocked over. Now, we found it kind of interesting that this particular interaction was happening in moments where we were referring to information or having questions regarding the Civil War. And we're not entirely sure what relevance the Civil War had in regards to this particular Nerf ball being knocked over. Now, the Waverly Hills Sanatorium has been around since the very, very late 1800s. It's very possible that a patient that was there may have been a veteran of the Civil War, and they were nearing the end of their life, and so we're not entirely sure. Haunted Peach, when this is happening, did you expect the ball to be knocked over like that?
No, I didn't expect the ball to fall over for something like this. Honestly, I thought we were just going to stand there and see it not do anything.
Yeah, a lot of times where we've tried object manipulation and investigation, nothing happens. And so when it does, as you can tell by my enthusiasm in the clips, it's a little overwhelming. So, yeah, we didn't know what to make of it. Again, we're not entirely labeling this paranormal. We're labeling it unexplained at the moment. I can tell you that because of the way Waverly Hills is currently designed, there was some cross breeze coming through, but we ran this experiment for a good 10-15 minutes, and the ball was stationary for a majority of the time, and it only fell down in those 3 instances. So no, as you can see in the clips, no one physically knocked them over, no one was blowing air at them. Could it have been a gust of wind that just happened to pass through and knock them over? Yes, but I feel like, given the coincidence behind the correlation of the football falling over compared to the questions being asked, that it's very possible that we may have been interacting with a spirit. And there are more reasons for that, and these actually have to do with audio evidence that we managed to capture during this session as well. Which brings us to the final part of our evidence reveal, and that is the audio evidence and recordings that we managed to capture during some of these sessions. So, without further ado, let's move into the audio recordings. So, keeping with this particular room 304, which is our very first session, let's review some of the EVPs that we actually captured. Now, we will say this, a lot of the voices that we captured throughout this investigation were actual disembodied voices that we heard with our own ears. And not just Haunted Peach and I, but a majority of our group was hearing these voices, these footsteps, these knocks. So keep that in mind. A lot of these were disembodied voices. So during this session, we had what appeared to be 2 particular spirits that were either with us or just outside the room, but they were interested in the stuff that we were doing. And Haunted Peach, what would you say these particular spirits were?
It was one child and a male.
Yeah, it seemed like there was an older male and a child. So we're going to go ahead and share with you the first EVP here. Again, this is during the 304 session. I'm going to play the full clip for you now, and you can hear what sounds like a child humming. So here is that EVP clip.
The bats are coming back. That doesn't attack me.
Do you enjoy the music?
Mario has a
Did you hear that?
voice.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
That was a kid's voice, wasn't it?
It sounded like a hum almost.
The bats are coming back. That doesn't attack me.
Do you enjoy the music?
Mario has
Did you hear that?
voice.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
That was a kid's voice, wasn't it?
It sounded like a hum almost.
The bats are coming back. That doesn't attack me.
Do you enjoy the music? Mario has
Did you hear that?
voice.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
That was a kid's voice, wasn't it?
It sounded like a hum almost.
Okay, that was the EVP clip of what appears to be a child humming. Now we're obviously letting you know what we hear in the audio clip because there isn't anything being spoken. We're going to go ahead and isolate just the EVP itself, and you can hear what we heard at the time. As you can tell by the audio, we did hear this with our own ears. Here is the isolated EVP. Okay, that was the EVP of the child humming. So let's move on to the next EVP. This is also in 304. And again, keeping with the whole child theme here and having a playful spirit, here is an EVP in a disembodied voice of what we believe to be a child laughing. Here's the full clip.
What's the hissing? Did you hear that again?
Yeah,
I heard
did you
that.
hear that?
I heard that.
Over here.
What's the hissing? Did you hear that again?
Yeah,
I heard
did you
that.
hear that?
I heard that.
Over here.
What's the hissing? Did you hear that again?
Yeah,
I heard
did
that.
you hear that?
I heard that.
Over here.
What's the hissing? Did you hear that again?
Yeah,
I heard
did
that.
you hear that?
I heard that.
Over here.
Okay, and as you can hear, we reacted to that. It was that when we were hearing these voices, Haunted Peach, what do you recall? Did you find it surprising that we were hearing so much activity as far as disembodied voices go?
I did find it surprising. When we first went in there, my first thought was to debunk it. We would look outside, over just outside onto the land, and we wouldn't see anyone else. At one point, we even thought it was the others in our group, but quite a bit of them at the time when it first started, they were all with us in completely different conversations.
Yeah, and that's the crazy part about it is that we would inspect, we would check, down the hallways. Was there anyone else that may have been on the property that we didn't know of? And every time we checked, there was no one there. So it was pretty shocking to hear so many voices. Let's go ahead and isolate the laughing here so you can hear the disembodied child's laughter. Here's the isolated clip. Okay, that was the isolated EVP clip of the child laughing, and it was very startling to hear this. I don't think we've ever been to a location that right off the bat was giving us activity just from the get-go. So it was pretty astonishing to experience that real time when we were there, and even more so that we actually captured these on audio. Let's move on to the next one. This one was also captured in room 304. We're going to go ahead and play the full audio clip for you now, and then we'll review it. Here it is.
Come to communicate with us.
What was that?
I heard that.
Come to communicate with us.
What was that?
I heard that.
Come to communicate with us.
What was that?
I heard that.
Come to communicate with us.
What was that?
I heard that.
So that was the full audio clip of this particular EVP, the third of the session that we managed to capture. Now these are not in any chronological order. We're just sharing them based on what we captured. There's no specific order to them. But this one, you'll hear one of our group members, Victor Huesca, asking for the spirit to manifest or show itself. And then you hear a reply that comes after that. And we're going to go ahead and isolate just what the EVP is saying, and we'll review it after that. Here's the isolated EVP clip. Okay, that was the isolated EVP clip. As you can hear, there is definitely a voice replying to Victor during this moment. And Haunted Peach, when you heard this, what is it that you're hearing the voice say in response to Victor's request?
What I heard it saying was, "I'm trying."
Yeah, it sounds like the voice is replying, "I'm trying." You can hear sort of a little bit of frustration in the voice when it's replying. Very interesting EVP, and I mean, we don't really know exactly what to make of it, but Haunted Peach and I are of the opinion that it's saying, "I'm trying." So we're going to go ahead and replay that isolated EVP clip. Listen closely, and if you hear something different, of course, please let us know in the comment section. The EVPs are always open to interpretation. So here is the isolated EVP clip of what we believe it is saying, "I'm trying." Here it is. Okay, so let's move on to the next EVP clip. This one again is also from room 304. At some point in time, our group was singing songs to try to elevate the activity that was happening. And so before I began to sing a song, I was trying to figure out what type of music this particular spirit would have liked. And so I make a suggestion on music, and then there is a audible voice that came through and said something, voiced their opinion, I believe. And we definitely did hear this real time. It was a disembodied voice, so here is the full audio clip.
Did you like hymns? Christian hymns? Did you hear that?
Yeah. Well, a female voice, right?
Yeah.
Did you hear that?
Sound like she said Christian hymns.
Did you like hymns? Christian hymns? Did you hear that?
Yeah. Well, a female voice, right?
Yeah.
Did you hear that?
Sound like she said Christian hymns.
Did you like hymns? Christian hymns? Did you hear that?
Yeah. Well, a female voice, right?
Yeah.
Did you hear that?
Sound like she said Christian hymns.
Did you like hymns? Christian hymns? Did you hear that?
Yeah. Well, a female voice, right?
Yeah.
Did you hear that?
Sound like she said Christian hymns.
Okay, so that was the EVP clip in its entirety. Now we're going to go ahead and isolate just the EVP itself. Again, keep in mind, Haunted Peach and I and most of our group heard this when it happened. So here's the isolated EVP. Okay, that was the isolated EVP clip. Now, Haunted Peach, when we heard this real time, what do you think is being spoken here? You kind of alluded to it in the EVP recording. What do you conclude is being said in the actual EVP?
Christian hymns is what I thought.
And was this something that, you can hear it in the audio recording. This was something you had thought you had heard at the time. Do you feel any different about what you heard then versus the actual EVP clip?
No, I actually don't feel any different from what I heard and thought it was. It's still Christian hymns.
Yeah, and I agree, it sounds a lot like Christian hymns. Now, most of these EVP clips we did review with our group before presenting them. Now again, all of these are open to interpretation. We're just presenting what Haunted Peach and I agree was being spoken in those EVPs. So here's the isolated EVP of what we believe is being spoken, and that is Christian hymns. Here it is. Okay, that was the isolated EVP. Now we're going to move on to one last EVP from this particular session. This again goes along with the songs that we were singing. Now you'll hear one of the investigators, her name is Karen, she's singing a particular song, and as she's singing the song, she'll stop singing and then you'll hear a male voice say something. And it's a very interesting EVP, so I'm going to play the full clip. Here it is.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star. A little bit of activity on the case.
Did someone just talk?
I heard that. It was a man. It was down this hall, it sounded like, down here.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star. A little bit of activity on the case.
Did someone just talk?
I heard that. It was a man. It was down this hall, it sounded like, down here.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star. A little bit of activity on the case.
Did someone just talk?
I heard that. It was a man. It was down this hall, it sounded like, down here.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star. A little bit of activity on the case.
Did someone just talk?
I heard that. It was a man. It was down this hall, it sounded like, down here.
Okay, that was the full EVP clip. Now, Haunted Peach, do you recall this moment when we were, you had Karen singing the song Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and then do you remember hearing this male voice at that time?
I actually do remember hearing this male voice at that time. It actually was audible.
Yeah, it was loud. It was kind of creepy. We definitely didn't expect it. Would you say it sounded like an older male?
It did sound like an older male. It wasn't a child, just with the way the voice came out.
Yeah, there was some bass and some raspiness behind the voice too. But here, let's go ahead and isolate just the EVP clip itself so you can hear for yourself. Here it is. Okay, that was the isolated EVP. Now, Haunted Peach, what does it sound like the voice is saying in this one?
It sounds like the voice was saying twinkle.
Yeah, surprisingly enough, Karen was singing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and when she stopped singing it, it honestly sounds like a older male saying twinkle, almost continuing the song. We're not entirely sure that that's what's being spoken, but that is what Haunted Peach and I have agreed on being spoken in the actual EVP. So here's the isolated EVP clip of Twinkle. Here it is. Okay, so that was the isolated EVP clip of what we believe is saying Twinkle. Let's move on to the next location. Now this particular set of audible recordings are from the body shoot. When we were in the body shoot, you'll recall from our group podcast that we were all lined up along the stairway of the body shoot, and I was actually at the top. And during the recording session, we definitely heard some things that were out of place, considering that all of us were being very quiet for the most part. Now, I distinctly recall these moments and when they happened. These are sounds like footsteps, and we definitely heard that audibly when we were in the body shoot. Now, these footsteps actually sounded like they were just outside the entrance or coming into the body shoot, and so that's what makes them a little more pronounced. But here are the audio clips of the footsteps that we heard. There's 2 audio clips. I'm going to play them in succession, and listen closely for the footsteps. Here it is.
For those of you that are in here, is there anyone
Did you
here
hear
who
that?
would like to have a seat with us?
There was a voice at the top over here.
Yeah.
We do have recorders running.
I just heard movement up there. Did you hear that?
Yeah. Heard that.
I hear footsteps.
For those of you that are in here, is there anyone
Did you
here
hear that?
who would like to come
Yeah.
sit with us?
There was a voice at the top over here.
Yeah.
We do have recorders running.
I just heard movement up there. Did you hear that?
Yeah. Heard that.
I hear footsteps.
For those of you that are in here, is there anyone
Did you
here
hear
who
that?
would like to come
Yeah.
sit with us?
There was a voice at the top over here.
Yeah.
We do have recorders running.
I just heard movement up there. Did you hear that?
Yeah. Heard that.
I hear footsteps.
Okay, that was the full clip of the footsteps. You'll also hear that there was a male voice that we heard. Now, we all heard this, and we acknowledged it in the recording. So Haunted Peach, any commentary about the body shoot and the sounds that we were hearing, any of the stuff that we experienced in there?
The body shoot itself, personally to me, was really active. There were a bunch of different sounds. Not only that, there were I didn't feel comfortable down there. I kind of felt like I shouldn't be down there.
Yeah. We had some personal experiences that happened that we covered in the podcast. So if you're interested in that, listen to our episode 16 podcast where we talk about some of the experiences that happened to some of the group in the body shoot. But let's go ahead and isolate the audio clips that we have here of the footsteps and the voice so you can hear those isolated. Here they are.
Is there anyone? Is there anyone? Is there anyone?
Okay, that is it for the body shoot. We're going to move on to the next location. This one is the only EVP that we actually managed to capture on the second floor. Now this was captured in the second floor cafeteria. So at some point our group split up into two, and Haunted Peach and I were in one group with paired up with Eli and Victor, and we were in the cafeteria. And honestly, on this floor, what would you say we experienced anything out of the norm?
There wasn't too much that we experienced out of the normal for this particular floor, just normal creaking and things settling.
Yeah, and it was weird because honestly we weren't getting anything. It was kind of quiet when it came to activity. But there was a moment in which I asked a question about a previous experience that we had during the walkthrough. And very interestingly, we got a response. So here's that full EVP clip for you for that moment.
Did I see you at the end of the hallway earlier? Did I see you at the end of the hallway earlier? Did I see you at the end of the hallway earlier?
Did I see you at the end of the hallway earlier? Did I see you at the end of the hallway earlier? Okay, there's the full audio clip. You will hear me ask a question about seeing someone at the end of a hallway earlier on in the evening. And there's a moment of silence, but then there is a female voice that comes through and says something. So let's go ahead and isolate just the audio EVP of that moment, and here it is. Okay, that was the isolated EVP clip. Now, Haunted Peach, when you listen in on this recording, what do you hear the spirit, or purportedly the spirit, say in response to my question?
I hear, yes, you did.
Yeah, you'll hear me ask, did I see you at the end of the hallway? It was referring to an earlier experience, and then you hear a female voice say, yes, you did. Very interesting EVP. We totally didn't expect anything to come out of this particular session because there was nothing happening at the time, but definitely there was something there, and it sounds like a female saying, yes, you did. Let's go ahead and isolate just the EVP clip again and let you hear it. Here it is. Okay, so that was the EVP of the woman replying, yes, you did. Let's move on to the next EVP session. Now, this EVP session was conducted in the morgue, and the morgue was actually the very first location that we went to after our groups split up into two, and we had an opportunity to conduct some EVP sessions inside of the morgue and eventually explore the rest of the first floor. So let's get right into the EVP that we want to highlight here from the morgue. So this EVP actually occurs in a moment where we thought we had heard something in the hallway. You'll hear me ask, is there someone in the hallway? And then you'll hear a whispered response come through after that. Here is the full audio clip. There's someone here in the hallway?
Yeah, what did I see that door?
Oh. There's someone here in the hallway?
Yeah, what did I see that door?
Oh. There's someone here in the hallway?
Yeah, what did I see that door?
Oh. There's someone here in the hallway?
Yeah, what did I see that door?
Oh. There's someone here in the hallway?
Yeah, what did I see that door?
Oh. Okay, that was the full audio clip in its entirety. Now let's go ahead and isolate that whisper that came through in the recording. Now this is one of the EVPs that we actually did not hear at the time. This one was discovered during the review of our audio recording. So here is that isolated EVP. Okay, that was the isolated EVP. Now, when you listen to it, it sounds like a female whispering something. And Haunted Peach and I, we agree that the voice and the way that the vocals come out, it sounds like the person that's whispering has a southern accent. And that makes sense for where we were because we were in Kentucky. So in analyzing the EVP, Haunted Peach, what do you hear is being spoken by the potential spirit that's communicating with us.
What I can hear is it saying young blood.
Yeah, it sounds like a woman is whispering young blood. Now, within the context of the actual EVP, we're not sure why it's saying that. Of the four of us that were in the morgue, that being myself, Haunted Peach, Victor Huesca, and Eli Bay, of the four of us, the youngest one was Victor. And so it may have been referring to Victor, but again, this is something we didn't hear at the time, so without context, we don't really know what the meaning is behind this EVP, but Haunted Peach and I both agree that we are hearing young blood. So here's the isolated EVP clip one more time. Again, you're listening, in that whisper you'll hear young blood. Here it is. Okay, so that was the EVP of young blood. Well, let's move on to the next location that we checked out on the first floor. This comes from a session that we did in the first floor lobby. For those that have never been to the Waverly Hills Sanatorium, every Halloween season they turn the first floor into a haunted house attraction. And so when you walk down the halls of the first floor, it's painted with all kinds of spooky figures like ghosts and skeletons and monsters and vampires and all of that. So walking down the hallways is already eerie, but at the far end of the hallway, opposite the morgue, there is a lobby area, and they have like this sort of Game of Thrones looking room with a throne and a large table and these two knights statues standing on either side. So this is the area wherein we did another EVP session, because there is reported to be a lot of activity. Well, during this EVP session, we managed to hear a couple of disembodied voices. Now, we're going to play this next audio clip in its entirety. You'll hear me start to ask a question, and then we'll hear an audible female voice, a disembodied female voice, come through. We'll acknowledge it, then you'll hear the K2 meter that we had running in the room go off. Then you'll hear me ask the question, and you'll hear us acknowledge that we heard a whisper. I'll let you know right ahead that the whisper is really, really difficult to hear, so we're going to focus mainly on the first voice that comes through, the audible female voice. Here's the full audio clip.
I'll ask you again. Do you hear that? Okay. Do you feel that you were misdiagnosed? I just heard a whisper.
Yes.
And it sounded like, maybe.
No way.
Yeah. I'll ask you again. Do you hear that? Okay. Do you feel that you were misdiagnosed? I just heard a whisper.
Yes.
And it sounded like, maybe.
No way.
Yeah. I'll ask you again. Do you hear that? Okay. Do you feel that you were misdiagnosed? I just heard a whisper.
Yes.
And it sounded like, maybe.
No way.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the full clip in its entirety. Now, we've actually done a little further analysis of the first voice that comes through, and we might have an idea of what it's actually saying. So let's go ahead and first isolate that EVP, listen to it a few times, and then we'll give you an opinion on what we believe it's saying. Here it is. Okay, that was the isolated EVP clip. You'll hear what sounds like a female voice. Now, Haunted Peach, what did you just say that it actually sounds like it's saying?
It sounds like it's saying my name.
Yeah, it sounds like it's actually saying Cassie. Now, Haunted Peach's first name is Cassandra, and she always goes by Cassie. Keep in mind that at this exact point in time, the other group is on the 3rd floor, and we are all the way on the 1st floor in a room that is surrounded and totally blocked off. There are no windows around that voice could travel through. There's quite a few set of walls in between us and the stairway, the nearest stairway that would lead up to the 3rd floor. So there's no possible way. And also, Haunted Peach is the only female in our immediate group. So again, there's no possible way that a female voice could leak into and contaminate the audio recording that we were doing. And if you hear from the recording, it honestly sounded, at least to us when we heard it, it sounded like this person who was talking or spoke out was actually a few feet away from us, in the adjacent room. So it's pretty astounding that we hear that. But yes, Haunted Peach and I, and actually during reviewing this, we were unsure about what it was saying, but we are of the opinion that it's saying Cassie. Now, it could definitely be saying something else, but for the meantime, this is what we have formulated based on what we hear in the recording. If you hear something different, again, everything that we're presenting is open to interpretation. We would definitely like to hear your opinions on what you believe is being spoken in the EVP. Before I replay that EVP, Haunted Peach, do you have any commentary overall on this EVP and the 1st floor of Waverly overall?
Yes, actually. What I wanted to add was the other females that were in our group were on a completely different side of the building. How we knew this was we had walkie-talkies. One person had one, I had the other. And they were turned off at that time specifically so we could take care of an EVP session. There were no other females in the close vicinity of that room.
Yeah, and everyone else was, like I said, they were on the 3rd floor, and Haunted Peach alludes to them being on the other side of the building. And the Waverly Hills Sanatorium is a gigantic building. Even with how empty it is and the open hallways and rooms, it's very hard for a voice to carry all the way through down to the 1st floor, into the lobby area where we were. Let's move on to the next location. Now, this particular EVP session that we're going to review was the very last EVP session of the night. Now, like I said before, none of these are in any particular order. This particular EVP session was done in the 3rd floor hallway. Now, after a very intense session in room 502, which is on the 5th floor, we went down into the 4th floor, and we didn't really experience much there, so we went down into the 3rd floor. And when we went to the 3rd floor, we came across a ball, a toy ball that was in the hallway. And this ball was actually left over by the Ghost Hunters Taps crew from the night before. Apparently they had an annual event that they held at the Waverly Hills, so there were many Taps members and their families there investigating the night before. And so this particular ball was left in the hallway, the idea being that a child spirit roams the third floor, and this child spirit would play with the ball or interact with it. So we came across this ball and we began to do an EVP session. And during this EVP session, we heard some disembodied voices. We're going to go ahead and review those now. Now, this first one, we were trying to get the spirit activity going and have whatever spirit was there move the ball. So you'll hear one of us ask for them to play with the ball, and then we heard this very loud male voice reply. Here's the full audio clip of that moment.
You don't feel like playing?
Did you hear that?
Was that no?
It sounded like a no.
You don't feel like playing?
Did you hear that?
Was that no?
It sounded like a no.
You don't feel like playing?
Did you hear that?
Was that no?
It sounded like a no.
Alright, that was the full audio clip of that moment. Now, as you can hear from the audio clip, it was pretty startling to hear a voice come through from the darkness and reply to us in such a manner that seemed very aggressive almost. Now, we don't want to say that it was a negative spirit replying to us, but the tone in the voice was definitely commanding, and you can hear our surprise in hearing that response. So let's go ahead and isolate just the audio clip of the EVP itself and replay it a few times so that you can hear it. Here it is. Okay, that was the isolated EVP clip. Now, Haunted Peach, all four of us heard this voice when we were in the hallway, waiting for that ball to move. It's kind of undeniable what it's saying, but what do you hear this response saying?
What I heard this one saying, it was definitely a male voice saying a loud ballsy no.
Yeah, it was. It definitely came from the balls, and it was definitely a no response, and we knew that right away once we heard that voice, and it definitely startled us to hear it. Obviously you heard the surprise in our voices when we heard it at the time. What were you thinking when we heard this voice, Haunted Peach?
I remember thinking when we heard this, holy crap, this thing is either really irritated or just does not want to play anymore.
Yeah, it was definitely a moment that we will never forget from the Waverly Hills Sanatorium, and it's one of the best disembodied voices that we've ever heard come through in any investigation. Even though it was a one-word reply, it was so powerful that we were taken aback immediately when we heard it. So let's go ahead and isolate that again and have you listen to the EVP of the man replying no. Here it is. Okay, that was the EVP of the male voice replying no in response to us asking for him to play with the ball. But that was not the only disembodied voice that we heard during this session. Very shortly after this, probably less than a minute, as we continued to try and get activity going with the ball, we heard something else. We heard what sounded like music playing, and then I heard this with my own ears, and then as I acknowledged it, there was also a child's voice that came through right beside me, right next to where I was standing. And I heard this child voice come through, and luckily we managed to capture it on audio. So here's that moment in its entirety.
Can you hear music? Did you hear that?
No.
That was a child's voice. Over here. Can you hear music? Did you hear that?
No.
That was a child's voice. Over here. Can you hear music? Did you hear that?
No.
That was a child's voice. Over here.
Okay, that was the full clip. Now you'll hear music, and then you'll hear me acknowledge it. Now keep in mind that the third floor is the most open floor as far as the windows are concerned. The area that we were in had a lot of noise pollution from the outside, meaning you can hear the wildlife outside, and then off in the distance you hear a train horn. Now if you listen within the train horn, you can actually hear music playing. Now I was the only one that heard this at that time. No one else in our immediate group heard that, and no one in the other group was playing any music at this time either. In fact, at this specific moment in time, when we were doing this EVP session, the other group had already called it quits, and they were in the gift shop, which is a completely separate building right next to the Waverly Hills Sanatorium. So there's no possible way that they could have been the source of the noise pollution. And if it was noise pollution, then all of us in our group would have heard it, because we were all standing next to each other. I mean, merely a foot or two away from each other. So I was the only one that heard this, but I heard it audibly. I heard the music, then I acknowledged the music, and then you'll hear a child say something or laugh, and then you'll hear me acknowledge that as well. So all of that is in the full recording, but now let's isolate where the music and the disembodied voice came through. Here it is.
Can you hear music? Can you hear music? Can you hear music? Can you hear music? Can you hear music?
Okay, that was the isolated clip of the music and the child replying. Now, Haunted Peach, you didn't hear this, but when I presented this to you, what ran through your mind as far as what I heard that night?
What went through my head after hearing this, first off, I want to say children spirits are creepy. But no offense to them, it's just,
Yeah.
It's just something about it. I think it's just horror movies in my brain. But the music itself, we always try to debunk it. Always. And my first thought was maybe it was the train. I even remember telling you, are you sure that wasn't the train? And we had a clip of the train in a previous session, and we went back and played it, and it didn't match up to what it sounded like.
No, you can definitely hear the train horn. This is actually within the train horn, and you can distinctly hear musical tones that come through in the music. It's not like it's a radio playing. It actually sounds like older music. Nonetheless, it was something that I heard that no one else heard. Now, what are your opinions on the child voice? What did you hear? Now, at the time, I thought I heard laughter, but you pointed out that it sounds like the child voice is saying something.
It sounded like the child was saying music.
Yeah, and that's very weird. I mean, it obviously correlates with what I heard as far as the music is concerned, but it does kind of sound like the child is saying music, but it's at a moment where the train horn is really loud, so it's difficult to tell if it's saying music or if it's just maybe just the laughter and it sounds like it's saying that. We're not entirely sure, but we'll let you guys formulate your own opinion on what you hear. So let's go ahead and replay the isolated clips here for you now. Here they are.
Can you hear music? Can you hear music? Can you hear music? Can you hear music? Can you hear music?
Okay, so that was the EVP of the child spirit potentially saying music and laughing. Let's move on to probably the most intense part of the evening. We went up to the 5th floor and we were investigating in room 502. It's important to note that in room 502 there was reportedly a nurse that got pregnant out of wedlock, and this was during a time where that kind of thing was very taboo and it was very frowned upon, and women at that time who got pregnant out of wedlock were ridiculed, and so this nurse unfortunately committed suicide in room 502 by hanging herself. Subsequently, sometime later, a separate nurse, unrelated to the nurse that hung herself, she stayed in room 502 as well and eventually also committed suicide, but she committed suicide by jumping out of a window from the 5th floor. Given the heaviness of the subject of suicide, when we entered room 502, 3 of us in the group were very sensitive in how we were asking questions. Unfortunately, one of our group members decided to ask a rather insensitive question, and this led to an immense amount of paranormal activity. Now, I say that it's paranormal because given the circumstances that we were in, all 4 of us were the only ones on the 5th floor. There was no one near us that could have caused the noises, voices, so there was no way for us to debunk it by any physical means as far as the noises and voices being caused by other investigators or an outside source. Again, the Waverly Hills Sanatorium is surrounded by woods, so it's very difficult for voices to just kind of bleed through. Now there are outside noises such as wildlife, and as you could tell in the previous EVP, there's train horns because there's railroads that pass near the Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Along with that, there's also a nearby airport. But all of these things taken into account didn't explain the voices that we were hearing. Additionally, the other group was actually on the 3rd floor in the cafeteria while we were up on the 5th floor. And they had their own very personal, intense paranormal experiences that we discussed back in our group podcast. So if you're interested in hearing about that, go back to that podcast and you can hear exactly what happened. But we're going to focus on what we actually managed to capture during our intense 502 EVP session. Now, before we get into the EVPs, Haunted Peach, you were there with me. Describe the feeling that was being emitted in that room once this particular question was asked. Now, we're not going to go into the actual question, what was actually said. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on what exactly happened after that question.
After that question, the room went from I guess you could say it went from kind of a sad atmosphere to a very angry atmosphere and a bit insulted as well.
Yeah, there was an immediate feeling of being insulted and anger, and intertwined with all the sadness as well. Certainly what started out as something, some kind of aggressive type of energy, and again, we're not big on energy, but this was something very palpable that we could feel. We could feel the air around us change dramatically once this question was asked. In fact, when the question was asked, I even turned and acknowledged just how things had changed rapidly. And this happened within seconds. During these moments of intensity, there was a saving grace, and that was Eli. And as a psychic medium, he certainly helped to calm down the activity that was going. It was still pretty active throughout our session, and out of the 20 minutes that we were there was a lot that was going on. Haunted Peach, could you describe what it felt like to have Eli potentially communicating with the spirit, trying to calm it down, and how things changed progressively as we went on?
I remember that it was different for me. This is something that I haven't exactly felt, I should say, because it was slowly, the air around us was starting to calm, but I really can't describe it because some of it I could hear audibly, but not all of it. When Eli started communicating with the spirit and calming it down, basically the energy around us, it went slowly from very, very angry back to sad, but it was slowly calming down.
Yeah, it was definitely a change in the feelings that were going through our minds in that particular moment. Things definitely calmed down thanks to Eli, and we're thankful for that. So let's get on with the actual EVPs that we captured. So the first one is a very pivotal moment. We were all standing in the room. Now the room itself is actually really small, and we were, asking questions but trying to be more sensitive at that point. And probably a minute or two into that session, we began to hear footsteps and random voices. But one thing in particular stood out among all the EVPs that we captured. And this was the audible sound of a woman crying. And I actually did not hear this. I'm not sure if Eli heard this as well, but I know that this was heard by Victor. And being that he was the one that asked the question, and then to hear the weeping of a woman come through out of the darkness really startled him. And you can actually hear it in the audio recording. So let's go ahead and listen to that full recording right now. Here it is.
We all have compassion for you. Did you guys hear that? I heard sobbing. Oh my God. We all have compassion for you. Did you guys hear that? I heard sobbing. Oh my God. We all have compassion for you. Did you guys hear that? I heard sobbing. Oh my God. We all have compassion for you. Did you guys hear that? I heard sobbing. Oh my God. We all have compassion for you. Did you guys hear that? I heard sobbing. Oh my God.
Okay, and that was the full audio clip of that moment. You'll hear what sounds like a female crying, and then you'll hear Victor acknowledge it with a very startled and almost shaken voice. And then you'll hear another female voice embedded in that. But we're not sure what is being spoken, but let's go ahead and isolate just that particular EVP and have you hear that for yourselves. Here it is.
Did you guys hear that? 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 Did you guys hear that?
Okay, that was the isolated EVP. Again, what you're hearing there is crying from potentially the same female spirit that the question was directed at. Haunted Peach, when you heard this, do you recall hearing the crying when it happened?
Yes, I do remember this, and I couldn't get that sound to be debunked at all.
Yeah, so we did have some instances where it sounded like there was a female screaming off in the distance, and we found out later when we investigated on the 4th floor that that screaming noise was actually being caused by some birds in the woods, which was actually very startling because I never knew that birds could make that kind of sound. However, getting back to the EVP clip, this particular noise was not birds. It was definitely not birds because the screaming sound was a very distinct noise that we were able to debunk. The crying, however, this was something very prevalent to that particular situation. So let's go ahead and listen to that isolated EVP clip one more time. Here it is.
Did you guys hear that? 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 Did you guys hear that?
Okay, so that was the EVP of the female crying. Well, let's move on to the next EVP that we're going to highlight here. Again, this was during, all of these next EVPs are all from 502. And this one in particular is a Class A EVP. As we were investigating in that room when we were doing our session, there was a whispered voice that came through in one of the recordings. This wasn't something that we heard at the time, so this was actually discovered upon review of our audio recordings. So let's go ahead and play that full clip for you now. Here it is.
One more.
I heard another voice.
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 Okay, that was the full audio clip. And you'll hear us just kind of randomly investigating, but then you'll hear a whisper come through before Haunted Peach starts talking. Now, let's go ahead and isolate just the EVP itself, and you can hear for yourselves what is being spoken. Here it is. Okay, that was the isolated EVP clip. Now, Haunted Peach, when you hear this, it's pretty clear what's being spoken, but what do you hear in the EVP?
In the EVP, I hear help me.
Yeah, it sounds like, it almost sounds like a female voice whispering, help me. That's pretty heartbreaking given the situation that we were in at that moment. But anyway, let's go ahead and isolate that EVP one more time and have you hear the EVP of the whispered voice saying, help me. Here it is. Okay, that was the EVP of the whispered voice saying, help me. Let's move on to another rather sad EVP. We're going to go ahead and play the full audio clip of that particular moment. Now, just to give you a little context, this was during the time when Eli was trying to calm down the spirit that he was communicating with, that we were communicating with. So, within that context, he was making some statements, and there was a reply that I actually heard with my own ears. So here's that moment in its entirety. Here it is.
So I need you to forgive yourself as we stand here with compassion for you.
I heard I can't.
So I need you to forgive yourself as we stand here with compassion for you.
I heard I can't.
So I need you to forgive yourself as we stand here with compassion for you.
I heard I can't.
So I need you to forgive yourself as we stand here with compassion for you.
I heard I can't.
Okay, that was the full audio clip. Now you'll hear me acknowledge what I'm actually hearing or what I heard at the time. Upon analysis, we'll give our opinions on what actually is being spoken. But let's go ahead and isolate just the EVP clip for you now. And you can formulate your ideas on what is coming through in the EVP. Here it is. Okay, that was the isolated EVP clip. Now, Haunted Peach, in the clip, you'll hear me say that it sounded like the spirit said, I can't. Do you agree that that's what's being spoken in the EVP?
Yes, I do agree.
And do you recall hearing this?
I don't recall hearing it in that moment, but I do recall how I felt. I could feel the sadness in the room.
Yeah, and if I recall correctly, you even got emotional at one point.
Yes, I was actually very emotional in that room in particular.
Yeah, it was pretty intense in that moment, and I'm sure it's something you won't really ever forget. I certainly won't forget that particular room at all. So let's go ahead and isolate that EVP clip one more time. And we do agree that what is being spoken in the EVP is actually what I heard at that moment, which is, I can't. So here is that EVP one more time. Okay, that was the isolated EVP of I can't. But let's move on to the next EVP. None of these are in any particular order, of course. As with all the other EVPs that we've shared, everything is out of order. So at some point in this session, we were trying to figure out a name, and Victor outwardly asks, "What is your name?" And then you'll hear the Ovilus device that he had with him go off. And then after that, in the silence, you'll hear a voice come through. Now this voice was something that we, and by we I mean myself and Haunted Peach, heard at the time. So this was something audible. It was a disembodied voice, but we managed to capture it on audio, and here is a recording of that entire moment. Here it is.
Can you please give us your name?
Eleanor. Ellen, short.
Ellen.
Did I hear, physically hear that? Or vocally hear that? Thought like Eleanor.
Can you please give us your name?
Eleanor. Ellen, short.
Ellen.
Did I hear, physically hear that? Or vocally hear that? Thought like Eleanor.
Can you please give us your name?
Eleanor. Ellen, short.
Ellen.
Did I hear, physically hear that? Or vocally hear that? Thought like Eleanor.
Okay, that was the full audio clip. Now, as you can hear in the audio clip, you'll hear Victor ask the question, you'll hear the Ovilus, and you'll hear a voice that comes through. And Haunted Peach, when this voice comes through, what does it sound like to you?
When we heard the voice, it sounded like an older female.
Yeah, it definitely had that vocal tone of like an older female, which was kind of strange because it seemed like when we were there at the moment, we were actually getting voices not just of a young female, we were also getting the voice of an older female and of a child spirit. So it was kind of an intertwined mix of different disembodied voices that we were hearing. But this one in particular does sound like an older female. Let's go ahead and isolate just that EVP clip, and you can hear what is being spoken in the EVP. Here it is. Okay, that was the isolated EVP clip. Now, Haunted Peach, we both acknowledge what is being said or what we heard at the time. Do you agree that what we heard was an older female saying the name Eleanor?
Yes, I do agree that it was an older female saying Eleanor.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we tried to do some research and try to connect that name with someone that, maybe a nurse or that worked with the nurse that committed suicide, or if it was the name of a patient. But we weren't able to really locate any conclusive data on that. Nonetheless, it was definitely the name Eleanor that we heard at that moment, and we do definitely agree now listening to the recording that it was the name Eleanor. So let's go ahead and isolate that EVP one more time, and you can hear the spirit saying Eleanor. Here it is. Okay, that was the isolated EVP. Let's move on to the next EVP. This one is one that was only heard by Eli. Haunted Peach, myself, and Victor did not hear this when it occurred, but you'll hear Eli acknowledge what he hears or what he heard. It's pretty interesting once we isolate the EVP, so listen closely. You'll hear Eli ask a question, and then immediately after he finishes the question, there's a voice that comes through. It's a female voice. Then some more silence will pass, and then you'll hear Eli reference what he heard. Here is the audio from that particular moment in its entirety. Here it is.
How do you move forward? What are you saying? Who did they tell? What do you mean by that? How do you move forward? What are you saying? Who did they tell? What do you mean by that? How do you move forward? What are you saying? Who did they tell? What do you mean by that? How do you move forward? What are you saying? Who did they tell? What do you mean by that?
Okay, that was the full audio clip. Now you'll hear Eli asking, what do you mean when you say who did they tell? It was very interesting when I listened to this upon review. Was trying to see if he actually heard this or if it was something that he heard mentally, because he was psychically communicating with the spirit. We weren't sure at that moment if it was something that he heard mentally, but we were lucky enough to actually capture what was being spoken in the EVP, in the audio recording during that moment. So let's go ahead and isolate just the EVP itself. Listen very closely for what is being spoken. Here it is. Okay, that was the isolated EVP clip. Now, Haunted Peach, when we replayed this, what is it that you hear in the audio clip?
I hear a female say, who did they tell?
Yeah, just as he references in the audio recording, we definitely agree that the voice, the female voice that comes through, is saying, who did they tell? Now, to put some context behind that, we were guessing that what she meant by who did they tell, we were trying to guess and see if it meant who did they tell about the pregnancy, or who did they tell about her passing and her suicide. But nonetheless, there was definitely a response there Here's the isolated EVP of Who Did They Tell one more time. Here it is. Okay, that was the isolated EVP clip. Well, let's move on to the very last EVP that we're going to share with you. This one was interesting because the question that I asked in this EVP was in reference to a personal paranormal experience that I had earlier in the evening. So I had an experience where I saw a full-bodied apparition on the property. Now, this wasn't in the sanatorium. This was actually outside the sanatorium on the road that leads into the property. So I had seen this female figure, a full-bodied apparition, and I had this experience. Now, I go into what happened during that experience on the previous podcast when we were discussing our personal paranormal experiences, but this question in particular was in reference to that. You'll hear me reference that particular moment, and there is a female response that comes through that I didn't hear, or none of us heard at the time. Here's that moment in its entirety. Here it is.
I don't think it was you, it was someone else, wasn't it? I don't think it was you, it was someone else, wasn't it? I don't think it was you, it was someone else, wasn't it? I don't think it was you, it was someone else, wasn't it? I don't think it was you, it was someone else, wasn't it?
Okay, that was the full audio clip. You'll hear me say that it wasn't a particular spirit. We had been asking questions prior to that about trying to figure out if the spirit that I saw may have been related to the one that jumped off the 5th floor, or some other spirit, or if they knew who that was. But there was an interesting response that came through, and we're going to go ahead and isolate just the EVP clip itself so you can listen in and hear what was being spoken. Here it is. Okay, that was the isolated EVP clip. Now, Haunted Peach, what do you hear in that particular moment? It's definitely a female voice. What do you hear it saying?
I hear it saying, I've seen her.
Yeah, it sounds like a female saying, I've seen her. Basically referencing that she has seen the spirit that I saw, the apparition that I saw. Now, I don't know if this is anything to do with the particular spirit I'm talking about, but it was definitely interesting to get an intelligent response like that. And Haunted Peach and I both agree that it's saying, I've seen her. So here is that isolated EVP one more time. Okay, that was the isolated EVP. That does it for the evidence that we are sharing for the stuff that we captured at Waverly Hills Sanatorium. We definitely do have additional EVPs that we captured, but those were mostly Class C EVPs. Once again, we share the best of what we captured in any location. So the Waverly Hills Sanatorium definitely leaves a lasting impression on both Haunted Peach and I. It was a location that we were very excited about investigating, and the destination itself was rather overpowering. We certainly didn't expect there to be as much activity as there was, but we were very happy with the results of the entire investigation overall. Haunted Peach, any lasting impressions or thoughts on the Waverly Hills Sanatorium and our private overnight investigation that we had at that location?
Quite honestly, I'm never going to forget with everything that we experienced there. And definitely one of the biggest places we had on our bucket list to visit as well.
Yeah.
A group of people that we know and love.
Yeah, Haunted Peach hits the nail right on the head with that. It was definitely a must-see place, and along with all the other places that we got to see along the trip, Waverly Hills Sanatorium definitely takes the case. Now, having experienced everything that we did at the Waverly Hills Sanatorium, Haunted Peach, do you believe it's haunted?
It's very undoubtedly haunted.
Yeah. To say the least, it is definitely haunted, and it's definitely a location that we would love to return to at some point in the future. I know that they are currently working on turning it into a bed and breakfast or a hotel, and to be quite honest, even as a hotel, I would love to return to that location sometime in the future. So that does it for the evidence that we've captured. Again, if you have heard or seen anything different in what we've presented, please feel free to leave comments down in the comments section of what you see or hear. Everything is open to interpretation. We are not 100% calling everything that we captured paranormal. We're just presenting it to you based on our findings and all the recordings and data that we had from that evening, and giving our opinions on what we captured that night. Thank you everyone for your patience in waiting for this evidence reveal. We definitely appreciate all of your support. We do want to thank Victor, Diane, Stephanie, Eli, Dwayne, Katie, Karen, and the owners of the Waverly Hills Sanatorium. None of this would have happened without any of the group being able to come together and making it out to Kentucky and being able to investigate. It's definitely an evening we'll never forget, and we definitely look forward to doing another road trip similar to this one in the future. Look out for a new podcast coming soon where we'll talk about our trip in its entirety and some of the things that we didn't share that we actually got to experience at some of the locations that we went to. Again, thank you very much for your support. We love bringing you insight into all things paranormal. And just as always, happy hauntings.